I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
All right, welcome into this is episode 320 of Buck Around, and you'll hear a little bit different voice from our usual intro. Rich is on vacation this week, so you get kind of a not really a solo episode, but a solo as far as our co-hosts go. But we're going to continue with part of the big picture when we look at the opponents on the schedule for the Badgers every year. Today we have Purdue, and we're welcoming back a longtime guest from a lot of big picture previews for Purdue football, and it is Mike Carmin. And I would say Mike is, I know him through Black and Gold Illustrated, which is part of the On3 network. But Mike's been a long time Purdue analyst in all sports, including football. So, Mike, welcome in.
Thank you. Thank you. You didn't lose my number or my email or whatever. You're able to get a hold of me.
Not at all. And I was, I was thinking when I was doing a little prep for this too that I was trying to think if the first time we had you on, it was still Danny Hope.
Yeah. How many coaches are coached?
I know. And I'm thinking, was it Daryl Hazel? Was it Danny Hope? So either, because that was Hazel's first year, was it 2016 or was it 2015?
No, Hazel's first year would have been 2012.
It was 2012. Okay.
When,
all right.
When
okay.
Hope, Hazel, Brom, and now Ryan Walters.
So you know what? I guess that's a good place to start because, talking about Brom, I remember watching the first game that he coached for Purdue. And I remember, the Hazel era just was not a lot of success. And just that very first game, and I can't remember quite who it is against. I remember where I was, but I remember watching it and just thinking, this is just a completely different team. They look competent. They look focused. They look coherent. Like so much look better. And, I think, there was a lot of success under Brom, probably even more had there not been some injuries in, was it 2018, I think.
Right.
Or 2018 or 2019. I think they lost quarterback and Rondale Moore in the same play, wasn't it?
Yes, against Minnesota.
Yeah.
Elijah Sindelar and Rondale Moore.
Yeah, on the same play,
Yeah.
which is like
Yeah.
a total freak occurrence. But they did win the West in 2022. I don't know, what was your take on the transition from Brom away to Walters, or was that kind of expected? I mean, I know Brom quote went home, so I mean it's not unexpected, I guess.
Well, it wasn't a surprise he ended up at Louisville because if you remember, a couple years into his tenure at Purdue, Louisville had an opening and they kept calling, and he stayed at Purdue, got a nice salary increase contract, but it just wasn't for him. The timing was not right for him to move to Louisville at that time, and Purdue would have had to hit the reset button big time if he would have left in that short period of time because they had gone to a bowl in his first year. They had some momentum. He was recruiting well. He was getting guys like Rondale Moore, David Bell, players like that. And they were, as you mentioned, they looked like they had been coached when they were playing. That first game that you probably watched was against Louisville down at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah.
As Lamar Jackson was Louisville's quarterback at the time, and Purdue nearly pulled an upset. I mean, you walked away feeling, okay, this program is getting ready to head in the right direction. And they had hiccups throughout the year and through his tenure. That's understandable. But I think they went to 4 bowl games in 6 years. So it was a good era of Purdue football. And when he left, Purdue really doesn't go out and hire defensive coaches.
No, that's true.
As their head coach. I mean, they just don't do that. So when they ended up with Ryan Walters, it was a bit of a head scratcher because no head coaching experience. He comes from the defensive side of the ball. So those two elements were a little bit of a surprise that they went that direction. But, and we still don't know how this will all play out because this is year 2. You're in a new Big Ten now with 18 programs you got to deal with on an annual basis. His recruiting seems to be going well, but how is that relative to what everybody else is doing in the Big Ten? So, everybody's kind of worked their way through are they still the cradle of quarterbacks? Is offense still the big deal at Purdue type of thing? I think it is. And he's hired offensive personnel to keep that part going. But, he's a defensive guy. I know we'll get into this, but, they gave up about 30 points a game last year. So
Right.
they need to step it up defensively and bring their offense along with them.
Well, as 4-8 in 2023, I think they didn't have really that many bad games or anything like that. And I think for a first year coach after that with that seemed like a relatively successful season. At least that's the way it would seem from the outside. There's going to be a step off, and there were a lot of people that graduated, a lot of transfers and that sort of thing. But it was the overall vibe was that things were headed in the right direction, that they picked the right guy, even if he was a defensive guy.
Well, that's got to play out. And, when he took the job, it's different than it is today.
Right. Right.
But when you look back at last year, they were 4-8, but they had an opportunity really in the first game of the year against Fresno State. They were up 11 in the second half, ended up getting beat 39-35. You win that game, and if they go to Virginia Tech and win like they did, then you're sitting at 2-0. And you do have the meat of your schedule coming back, but you gain a little bit of momentum there on your side. Because they end up beating Illinois at home, end up trashing Minnesota at home, and beating Indiana. They lost Hudson Card for a couple games, the quarterback, which I think hurt them against Northwestern. And that wasn't the ideal situation for them. But 4-8 last year's, your record says who you are, and that's who they were. But to me, you just have to let this kind of play out now, because what the Big Ten is today may not be what the Big Ten is in 4 years. It may be completely different.
You may have the East and West back again.
Right. But I will say the one thing that maybe Walters has done in the short term is they look different. I mean, when you watch the spring game, the players look different physically.
Yeah.
That's they just, whether that's weight training, whether that's the transfers that they brought in, they seem to have a different caliber of athlete now than they did. Now, again, as I mentioned, what's that mean relative to who you play every week? We don't know that yet, but I do think they look more the part. Now it's just a matter if they have enough talent and enough depth to survive the grueling schedule that not only they have to go through, but everybody has to go through. This is not just a Purdue thing. This is everybody, and it's murderous for them, because you've added Notre Dame into the mix now.
I know.
For like 5 years, along with Washington, UCLA, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, so on and so forth. So it's a tough go for Purdue, but I think Walters is kind of approaching it the right way, as far as just trying to upgrade as much talent as you can throughout the roster.
Yeah, and I know you can only pick so much, but does this have to be the year that they finally get Notre Dame back on the schedule?
Yeah, a series that was scheduled, I don't know how many years ago.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was just, Purdue needs to play. I don't know if they need to play Notre Dame now in this environment, in this era of college football. But when the series was scheduled, they needed to have them back on the schedule.
Yeah.
But it's just unfortunate for them, the series of events that have happened in college football since that time that has maybe not made that a wise decision.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue, probably like other schools, needs to readjust their non-conference schedule based on who you're playing in the Big Ten now. If the goal is still get to 6 wins and get to a bowl game, then you've got to give yourself a runway in the non-conference season to have that opportunity. And I know Minnesota takes that approach. Other schools take that approach. I'm not saying that, they're playing the worst of the worst, but I think you have to be careful how you schedule non-conference games. But again, in 5 years, who knows what college football conference will look like.
No, it's crazy when you look at the Big Ten schedule now. It looks like a half of a non-conference schedule, even though they are conference games.
Right.
So more particular, going on the offensive side of the ball, I think having, and I don't know how much, autonomy or what, it's how much Walters lets the offense take care of itself or how that goes. But it seems like with Harrell and the kind of stuff that he does and his background, I would think that there's a lot of continuity there in terms of, what they've done for the past several years, maybe, I don't necessarily going back to the Joe Tiller basketball and turf, but it's really not Harrell is that kind of air raid spread kind of guy. That's been his thing. He did it in the NFL for a little while. I mean, he's seems like that's the kind of guy. And now with Card coming back with another year in that, in that system, and another year with a lot of the same players, at least from the outside, it looks like they'll at least have something going and have at least a couple guys that returning with Mockabee, especially, that they should be able to do pretty well on the offensive side of the ball. How do you see it playing out?
Well, I think they probably want to lean more run than maybe a traditional Purdue team would look, because when you start looking at their individual talent, Card can run the ball. He's a good runner.
Mm-hmm.
Felt like he had missed some opportunities to run more last year. But you never know. Was that a play call thing? Was that just an instinct thing on his part? But I do believe, I think they got later in the year, and I think he ran a little bit more, and I think they had a little bit more success on the ground. But Mockabee has definitely emerged as one of the top running back in the Big Ten. I think they want to lean on him, and they've added Reggie Love from Illinois, who led Illinois in rushing last year. So
right.
You have to give him the ball a little bit more. And I think their offensive line is at a point where they feel good about it, as well as Purdue can feel about an offensive line, because while the frontline guys are usually pretty solid, it's the backups and the depth where you get into trouble if you have injuries. So I think they have the ingredients to run the ball successfully. This is not 3 yards and whatever, but I think they want to sprinkle that in a little bit more to help with the passing game and help open up some downfield threats. Their biggest question on offense is just who is your top receiver and who is your top receiver going to be? And we don't know yet, because a lot of these guys haven't played. They're new to the program or were injured last year. So that's the situation that's going to have to play out throughout the year. Who do they lean on in the passing game? They have a couple good tight ends that they'll utilize, but if you're going to stretch the field and hit some big plays, then you've got to have some downfield threats. And that's something that I think is going to take some time for them to work out.
Yeah, they're in mid-20s last year. It's 24 points a game.
Yeah.
Which I feel like that should be up. That's not what you think of when you think of Purdue anyway.
Well, they had a few games. They had at least, I think, 2 games over 40. But then they had too many games under 20.
Yeah, right.
They only scored 14 against Iowa, which Iowa has a fantastic defense.
Right.
They scored 7 against Ohio State, which Ohio State has a fantastic defense. They scored 14 against Nebraska. Nebraska did not have a fantastic defense. They put 13 up on the board on Michigan, which is quite an accomplishment. Yeah. Even though that one came late. They only got 15 against Northwestern. So they had games where they were below what they should have been, but they had a couple games that they went over the high mark. I think that's why you have average points, but they need to balance that out a little bit more. And they need to produce a few more points against some of the better teams, against the better competition, and that's how they're going to be measured, so to speak.
Yeah, and looking at the defenses they've got coming up this year, I think Wisconsin's will be improved, and Illinois, it's hard to say where they're at, but they have Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon on the schedule too. So and Notre Dame as well. Those are right. Those are 4 really good defenses right there, just alone, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So they've got to figure out a way to produce a few more points against some of the higher quality defense, but also their defense needs to buckle down a little bit better against high caliber offense, and that way you can hopefully stay in the game a little bit longer.
Well, so that was where I was going to go next, is on the defensive side of the ball, and I know for Walters, he's been a part of some pretty good defenses in his career as an assistant, and 30 points a game isn't. That's not going to cut it. But at least, looking at the personnel they do have a couple potential stars in the secondary and with and at linebacker.
Yeah, Tydron Jenkins is the linebacker who he ranked right behind Nick Scorton, who left for Texas A&M via the NIL transfer portal.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And, I like how you combine them. I think that's appropriate.
Right. That's where he's from and all that, but
sure,
you can't really debate this stuff anymore because it's going to happen. He led the Big Ten. I think Nick Scorton led the Big Ten in sacks, but Jenkins was right behind him. Now they've moved Jenkins kind of off the ball into an inside linebacker position, with the hopes of him getting a chance to get to the quarterback a little bit more. And that kind of remains to be seen how that's going to play out. You know, that to me, that's one of their biggest question marks on defense is how are they going to attack the opposing quarterback? Because you lost Scorton. You know, Jenkins is in a different position. Is that going to work out for you? And they're going to have some guys on the defensive line step up and get some pressure and be disruptive at the line of scrimmage to help them. They have some young guys that played last year. Will Help was one who can come off the edge a little bit. So they've got a guy, Winston Berglund, another young guy who got playing time last year. So they have some pieces there, but how that all fits together. And, the interior of their defensive line probably, needs to be better as far as stopping the run, but also being able to get some pressure without blitzing the whole time. But I'm curious how the Jenkins thing works out. He was very good where he was, but that could have been in part because of Scorton on the other side. So maybe this is a better fit for him. So you just trust Walters to hope he knows what he's doing in that case, to kind of showcase him a little bit more. And then you get into the secondary. I think they have 26 defensive backs on their roster, which I don't know where that ranks in the Big Ten, but that's a high number. That's a lot. Now, Walters is a former defensive back, and he coaches defensive back, so maybe that's his comfort zone. But, their main one was Dylan Thieneman, his safety, Big Ten freshman of the year, had a tremendous year. I mean, he plays, well, I like to term, he plays in the next county when they line up. Yeah. And then he comes from the next county. Sure. I mean, he's very athletic. He can come down and make plays. But they do have a ton of defensive backs, and I'm curious how that works out as well. And they've got some transfers. And it goes along to what I said earlier. I think they look bigger, they look more athletic in certain positions, and defensive back in the secondary is one of those where they look the part a little bit more, but how those guys factor into this kind of remains to be seen.
Is Thieneman the third or the fourth one of his brothers to play at Purdue?
He's the third. The first one who had a scholarship before he got to Purdue. The other two did not have scholarships.
Right. Yeah, they both turned out spectacularly.
They did. They had, Jacob was, he was the true rags to riches story. Because he just came as a walk-on and worked his way into a starting position and eventually a scholarship, and got into some camps in the NFL, had an opportunity to showcase his stuff. But I mean, it's the Thieneman family is kind of Purdue football right now, and they always, it was interesting as you look back on it. They always talked about, the family did, about, well, if you think Jacob's good, then wait till this kid named Dylan arrives. And I happen to know his high school coach from a long time ago, who coached at another school in the area. And so he had, reminded me or told me, like, hey, look out for this kid coming. And it was a good get for Purdue. And this day and age, you got to keep him as much as anything.
Is he the last one of them?
Yeah, he would be the last.
Okay. There's in pretty much every Big Ten school, there's always a couple sets of brothers, and it's two, sometimes three, sometimes four, but I think those guys are right in there with that tradition. Right. It's kind of cool.
Well, it worked in Purdue's favor because of the older Thiemens wanted to major in engineering, construction type of thing, which is a specialty. At Purdue. And I think the middle brother actually did some work a long time ago, where I think it was on an internship with the stadium in LA, SoFi Stadium. I think he did some work with that during one summer.
Oh, that's cool. So, talking about that's, high school recruits and that sort of thing. And how do you think they fit in? I mean, not in high school recruiting, but in terms of the NIL and the transfer and how things have changed. Do you think, or is the sentiment like they're doing it right, they're being competitive, they're up with this stuff, or they're behind the times, or how do they fit in? It's kind of one of the things that I've been like to ask all the different teams, and we got a pretty interesting answer from the we had a guy talk about USC, and just because they have some odd program limitations that you might not think of, that's kind of made their transfer portal and their NIL a little weird, that you wouldn't necessarily think of as in terms of a powerhouse program like that. But there's the programs that, I like to talk about the classic Big Ten programs, the Minnesota's, Purdue's, Wisconsin's, Iowa's, Michigan State's, the non-Ohio State in Michigan, basically. I think they all do it a little bit differently. And I think they have to be a little bit more creative, or their allocations have to be a little bit different. How does Purdue fit in with that, and with their efforts and the different ways that they're doing things?
Well, they're trying to do it.
Yeah.
Number one.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Yeah, because it's hard to be like on the cutting edge, and there's certain financial limitations. I think there'll be more of them, but I don't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, they're trying to do it the right way, where the foundation of all their programs, not just football.
Yeah, sure. Right.
High school based. Matt Painter with Purdue basketball has made that work over the last several years, but football is a different animal because you got different numbers and it's more coast to coast recruiting than anything else. I would say that they've done what they can. They've tried to keep the players they feel like they need to keep. Obviously they've had to go out and get some help to raise some money, to get some funds. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But they've had some, they've had a few problems, but overall, I think it's kind of, for them right now, they're in a good spot. But the whole revenue sharing thing that's coming next year, where, they're going to get paid by the athletic department or the school, or however it's going to work, probably benefits a program like Purdue, and it benefits others, because it should even the playing field somewhat, where everybody has the same pool of money to pick from. But that doesn't stop NIL. That doesn't stop other things from happening.
No.
And it's just a matter of, if it's good NIL, then fine. But if it's bad NIL, the NCAA has to be quick and decisive in punishing these people and sending a clear message. Now, I'll believe that when I see it, because we've all been saying that for however many years. Mm-hmm. But Purdue's tried to do it the right way, and their fan base wants them to do it the right way. Their donor base is more giving money for scholarship and educational things, as opposed to, here's just a bag of money, come to Purdue and play.
Sure.
They don't, most of their fan base just does not view it that way. I talked to one of their big donors in Phoenix at the Final Four, and I asked him, I said, hey, when are you going to dip your toe into the NIL world? He's like, they know my stance on that, and I'm not doing it. Now, will that change at some point? I don't know. But that, to me, that's kind of the overall theme of the Purdue fan base. And there's other schools that do it the same way.
Sure.
But they get what they can. And unfortunately, coaches now, especially in football, their job has changed. They used to recruit and coach. Now they recruit, coach, and have to go raise money to help with NIL.
Right.
Now, revenue sharing should tamp that down a little bit, but I don't know how much. I mean, you still have to have, your pool of money has to come from somewhere, because all these athletic department budgets don't have $22 million just sitting around.
No, they don't.
And that money has to come from somewhere, because it's going to be a court order. It's not like you say, nah, we're not going to do that.
There's that too. Right. Yeah. Compliance.
So there's a lot of things that are going to happen, or going to need to happen. But, Purdue does what it can. And I think they're trying to recruit the right kids that are coming to the school for the right reasons, but understanding they are going to get paid. But they're going to step up and do what they can to not only get them here, but keep them here. But as you know, you get a little taste of it, you want more.
No, and true.
There's always somebody out there that is willing to potentially give you more if you want to make that move.
Well, that's the thing. That's an enlightening conversation, if you're, that you would get to have with a donor with a donor at that level. And it's, to me, the interesting part of it is that if you're going to give high school kids money, when they haven't done a thing, there's going to be, it's going to be a situation where, look, I mean, I have a lot of money, but I've thrown it away 4 times now. I'm kids that just haven't worked out. And I think that's going to have to find its level at some point. And it's interesting that, the conversation you're having with the donor, and I don't know if that's if I think at a lot of places, there's probably still a lot of money that's sitting on the sideline waiting for that to kind of clear itself up and have a little bit more, I guess, rationality in, some kind of rules that everybody can agree on, kind of thing, more than anything else. So I'm not surprised to hear that.
Well, I mean, and who knows, this over time, this probably will change, because the donors of today are the donors that are used to giving for scholarships and academic things. And that's kind of how they grew up donating their money. But now as we shift, you have more new money and this younger people with money and new money. Maybe they view this as, oh yeah, I want my school to be great. So here's my money.
So here it is. Yeah, right. Doing it what you will, right? Just get the best players you can. Yeah.
Go pay your players. I mean, I think we see that a little bit with the Michigan State situation where their main athletic donor, has given Mel Tucker 10-year contracts and
that's right.
Other people big contracts, and talk about something that blew up in their face.
Right.
That blew up in their face. So, but I'll be curious how that kind of shifts, if it shifts over time. And also just, does the revenue sharing calm this down a little bit? Those are kind of two big things that I'll kind of watch in the future.
Yeah. At least, it's just, football conversation, but at least on the basketball side, Purdue did have a basketball program that joined the longstanding 25-year tradition of playing for a national championship and not coming up a little bit short. So yeah, it's been kind of interesting looking back over 25 years of all the teams that have tried and not been able to do it. And it's pretty much been just about everybody, but it does stand for, at least on one side, at one part of the athletic department in one sport, that that's a lot of success that you can say right there. At least, what we're doing is definitely working. So
yeah, and I think people believe in that and they appreciate that. And this was what happened in March with Purdue basketball was a sign to everybody that this can work this way.
Right.
If you stay committed to doing it, doesn't mean that you don't have to step up and pay people, but you do it through a thoughtful process and you do it the way that your university stands for and your donor base stands for. That was an example. Now, whether you have to wait another 44 years to do it again.
Right.
I won't be around if you had to wait that long.
No, and so much has changed since Wisconsin was able to do that. I don't know how relevant it is anymore. Right. Yeah. So speaking of Wisconsin, I think I'm gonna have ask you for a soft prediction on how things are gonna work. And at least it's kind of one of those things with Purdue has been, at least as far as Wisconsin goes, Northwestern and Minnesota have broken streaks, and Northwestern's always given Wisconsin problems, but Purdue and even Indiana broke through against the Badgers last year. I don't know if that'll change this time around. I mean, at least I feel like most people think Wisconsin would be a little bit better with a harder schedule. And before turning it back over to you for a soft prediction, I would say the same thing about Purdue, is that they're probably going to be a better team, but they have a harder schedule than they did last year.
Well, the record may not reflect that what improvements have been made. And I think there will be improvements. They get a free square to start the year with Indiana State at home. But then it's different after that. And they're going to have to survive injuries and things like that. You're getting Notre Dame at home, which they've over the years they've sprung some upsets.
Sure.
But then a trip to Oregon State, which they lost their coach, they lost a lot of players, but you're going that far west to play a game. But yeah, I mean, Purdue needs to beat Wisconsin at some point here just to get that off their.
They really do. Yeah.
I mean, they need to, and they've had some close games with them, chances to knock them off and in that streak, and it doesn't have it worked out. It probably doesn't matter as much now that you don't have divisions.
Probably not.
But just for your peace of mind, for Purdue to beat Wisconsin. I mean, you don't want this streak hanging over your head until the end of whatever college football time we have coming up here. But yeah, I mean, you're sprinkling Oregon, which is a new opponent. You've got Ohio State, you got Penn State in November. I'm curious the type of team Purdue will have when they get to November and have to play those games. And they've got to figure out a way to survive. I can't sit here and tell you, well, other than the first game against Indiana State, which should be a win, other than that, I mean, they're going to have to play their butts off to really come out with some wins against this schedule. And if you can avoid serious injury and keep your starters going, then obviously you have a better opportunity to do that. But in this new Big Ten, my standard kind of soft prediction for Purdue every year is either 4-8 or 5-7.
Yeah.
You want to get to 6 to get to a bowl game, and there'll be years if it stays this way that they'll have that opportunity. you just don't want to get in a pattern where you're 2-10 for 2 straight years, or you're 3-9 for a couple straight, couple years. I view Purdue football in a way where, you're not going to challenge for the Big Ten every year, but if you gear up similar to what they did with Joe Tiller back in the late 90s and early 2000s, where you geared up for that 1 year where you had an opportunity to win the Big Ten and you took advantage of it and you got to the Rose Bowl, that's kind of what it needs to happen for programs like Purdue. Now, if you do that, then you're probably in the college football playoff.
Yeah, nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, nowadays. So, yeah, but kind of 4-8, 5-7 in that range. And I think you need to stay in that area to feel like you're competitive, doing the best you can. There's in my mind, there's no pressure on Ryan Walters if he goes 4-8 again.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either.
This is what it is.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I would be surprised to hear otherwise, especially given all the other things that have happened. And it's not like these teams don't have talent either.
Right, and they have more talent than Purdue has in a lot of cases. I would say if he goes through a stretch where he's 4-8, like for 3 straight years, or maybe he gets 5, or maybe he drops down to 3 1 year. There's just no reason to. I mean, as long as he's doing everything else well and they're trying to make it work, then there's really no reason to make changes, because who are you going to get that's going to change the whole narrative about your program based on who you have to play every year? I mean, you have to be better in recruiting, you have to be better in coaching and teaching, but depending on what the environment is, you got to be better in NIL too at times.
Right.
So you got to attract the best players you can. But I think that's kind of the era that Purdue's looking at right now. And season ticket sales are up this year. Credit that a little bit, the fact that you have Notre Dame on the schedule.
Yeah, probably.
It's cheaper for those people to buy season
right.
tickets at Purdue than try to go to games at Notre Dame. That used to be the case. I don't know if that's going to be the case now, but the fact that season ticket sales are up for Purdue is a good sign that people are interested. But you just, you have to. This is the hand that they're dealt with, and we'll see how this all plays out.
Yeah, I think so. And they've always been entertaining to watch. It's kind of a strange personal thing that I've actually produced, probably been the team that I've seen live the most over the past couple years. And I was there last year as well. And I already have my ticket for this year. So I'll probably see them again. And, they have, at least, from the Wisconsin perspective, most of, those games have been pretty competitive.
Yes.
I was at the 2018 one. I mean, and that's about as good a Big Ten game as there's been in the last couple of years. So at least there's that, even if it's they need to get over that hump. So
I've seen that, and I've also seen 62-0 or whatever it was, and I've seen
sure.
I've seen a
lot
of them.
The one thing too that Purdue has, at least over Wisconsin and a lot of its peers, except Iowa, is that they've beaten Penn State and Ohio State in recent times.
Right.
And that's something to say. So
right.
As far as and if they can pull up and do that, to your point, every so often and been knock down a big guy, I think that bodes well. So
Ohio State does not like coming to Ross-Ade Stadium.
No, they no. It's been tough. It's been tough. Ryan Day needs to find out.
Urban Meyer needs to find out too.
Yeah, good deal. Well, Mike, thanks a lot for coming on with us. But I really appreciate it. And if you want to tell folks where they can find your work and what you've been up to, go right ahead.
Yeah, I do some freelance work for goldandblack.com, part of the On3 network. So occasionally write stories for them, help cover games, and do other things. So this is what semi-retirement is, I guess. And, just a chance to dial back a little bit and stay involved, but don't have to do heavy lifting. But yeah, that's where you can find me on occasion, contributing to their website and their product.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on. Glad to have you back, and look forward to next year. All right.
Thank you for reaching out. Appreciate it.
You got it. Thanks again.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.